Hello my dear students. So in the previous chapter I explained the female reproductive system and the functions taking place in the female reproductive system. You all can remember the menstrual cycle, and during the menstrual cycle, that's a 28-day cycle, there are changes taking place in the ovary. That is the development of the primary follicle to the Graafian follicle and the releasing of the ovum, what we call as the ovulation, that takes place on the 14th day. At the same time, the uterus undergoes changes. There are 3 phases there. What are the phases? You all can remember. Initially is the menstrual phase where the wall of the uterus is expelled out, and then it is the proliferation phase where the wall rebuilds, and finally the last 14 days it is the secretory phase. So on the 14th day, after ovulation takes place, that is the ovum is released, and if the sperm enters the vagina, there can be fertilization taking place inside the fallopian tube. So if fertilization takes place, the fertilized ovum becomes the embryo and that gets implanted in the uterus. Then there is that development. But in the previous chapter, we discussed the changes taking place if there is no fertilization. So in this chapter, first we will look at what fertilization and implantation are. During the copulation, you know what copulation is. Entering of the semen into the vagina, and through that the sperms will swim and enter into the fallopian tube. So during the copulation, seminal fluid or semen is released into the vagina. So seminal fluid or semen is released into the vagina. So what is semen? You all can remember that. The sperms with the secretions from the seminal vesicle, the prostate gland and the Cowper's gland. So all that together is known as the seminal fluid or the semen. Sperm cells in semen swimming in the fluid pass through the uterus towards the upper part of the fallopian tube. So here students, you all can see the female reproductive system. So there, this part is the vagina. So the copulation, during the copulation, penis releases the semen inside the vagina. So through the cervix into the uterus, the sperms can swim. And from there, they can either go into this side, the fallopian tube, or the other fallopian tube. So it depends. You all know there is not a lot of chances. The probability of a sperm fertilizing an egg is very, very less. That is why the number of offspring produced are also less. So there, when the sperm enters into the fallopian tube, let's say this ovary is the one that is functioning within this menstrual cycle. So it has released an ovum. Ovum will travel this way. The sperm also travels this way. So they meet somewhere in the middle of the fallopian tube. So then fertilization can take place. So then one of the sperms fuses with the ovum. So one of the sperms fuses with the ovum, passing down towards uterus. Sperm is moving upwards from the uterus. The ovum is coming towards the uterus. Here, nucleic matter, that is very important. When we say fusion of the ovum with the sperm, it is actually the fusion of the nucleic matter. You all know students, DNA, nucleic acid, we have discussed that before. The chromosomes are the components that store the genetic information, and they are passed from one generation to another generation. So during fertilization, it is the nucleic matter of the ovum and the sperm that fuse together. That's very, very important. So mixing of characteristics, we have discussed this during sexual reproduction, mixing of the characteristic from the maternal organism and the paternal organism. So here it is the mother and the father. Why? The nucleic matter from ovum and the sperm fuse together. This phenomenon is called fertilization. So you have to remember all these terms, students. Now, ovulation is the releasing of the ovum. Thereafter, ovum, with the help of the movement of the fimbria, enters the fallopian tube. At the same time, copulation means releasing of the semen inside the vagina. So the sperm moves this way. Sperm moves this way. The ovum moves this way. So somewhere in this part, the fertilization can take place. So then it is the fertilized ovum. Thereafter, the fertilized ovum again will come down into the uterus and it will get implanted. So we will discuss that process after this. Fertilization of a sperm and an ovum. So here you can see sperm, you can remember the structure, students. There is the head, then there is a neck, the body and the tail. So here you can see this is the head part. Inside the head of the sperm, what do we have? There is a nucleus. And you can remember, students, the nucleus is haploid, N. At the same time, so here sperm, head. So then we have the ovum. Ovum is also haploid. That is again N. So during fertilization, here you can see the sperm, when it goes through or penetrates through the wall of the ovum. Inside the ovum, there will be the nucleic matter, and here also inside the head, there is the nucleic matter. So there, when the ovum and the sperm fuse together, the nucleic matter, that is the haploid chromosomes of the ovum and the haploid chromosomes of the sperm fuse together, forming the diploid cell. So this is what we call as zygote. So this process is what we call as fertilization. The ovum and the sperm, the nucleic matter combine together, fuse together and form the diploid cell that will be called as zygote. So here you can see, students. This is how an egg looks like or an ovum looks like and the sperm fertilization taking place. Is that clear to you? So this happens inside the fallopian tube. Fallopian tube. That's very important. And then the fertilized ovum or the zygote travels towards the uterus. I will move to the next slide. So here you can see from fertilization to implantation. We will first look at the diagram. You can see here, students, fertilization. So somewhere here the sperm travels this way, the ovum enters into the fallopian tube. So here the fertilization takes place. So then it is the zygote. Here you can see day 1 we call it zygote. You all have to remember all these different terms. Now zygote is just one cell. It is a diploid cell. And thereafter on the second day you can see, now if this is the zygote, it undergoes cell division. So it becomes 2 cells. Day 2, 2 cells. Then again it undergoes another cell division. So it becomes 4 cells. Here you can see day 3 it becomes 4 cells. And thereafter it keeps on dividing. 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16. And usually on the 4th day there are 16 cells. And thereafter towards the 5th day you can see there are many cells. Then we call that as the morula. So initially the ovum, after fertilization, the first day it's known as zygote, and once there is cell division taking place, now what type of cell division occurs here? It is mitosis. Here the cell division is mitosis. Why? Already the cell is diploid. So there it's the development of the fetus. So then it becomes morula, a group of cells. Then after that, morula enters the uterus. Here you can see through the fallopian tube, morula has come into the uterus, and thereafter on the 7th day we call it blastula. The blastula gets implanted in the uterus wall. That is implantation or interplantation. After fertilization until implantation. So now you have understood the diagram. We will look at the process. Fertilized ovum is referred to as zygote, while it is rolling towards the uterus. So through the fallopian tube, it's rolling towards the uterus. It divides to increase the number of cells. This is known as morula. So morula with about lot of cells on the 5th day. Morula disintegrates the tissues of uterine wall. Disintegrates, it pushes through the it goes into the wall of the uterus, sinks and deposits in the wall. This is known as implantation or interplantation. You have to remember that term. So thereafter only the fetus will develop. Is that clear to you? So now fertilization has taken place, implantation or interplantation has taken place. So now the blastula is within the uterine wall. It has disintegrated into the uterine wall. So after that, the fetus will develop. So we will discuss the development of the fetus after this. Development of fetus. Now this is happening inside the uterine wall, students. I will explain the process first. So inside the mother's womb, that is the uterus, we have the uterine wall. So there is a membrane, or there are membranes that form a sac-like structure. So this structure is known as the embryonic sac. Embryonic sac. And inside the embryonic sac, there is the embryonic fluid. Inside the embryonic fluid only, we have the fetus. Now we call the multicellular structure almost about 3 months old. We called it the fetus. So there you can remember initially zygote, after that morula, and then blastula on the 7th day. Blastula gets implanted or interplanted, and then the fetus develops. So there embryonic sac is formed and there is an embryonic fluid. This is the wall of the uterus. That is the wall of uterus. Now for this fetus to develop, there are substances that need to be provided from the mother to the uterus. So that occurs through a structure, again another structure formed here. This is what we call as placenta. Now you can remember, students, when we discuss classification, we say placental mammals. So we are placental mammals. There is a structure called placenta. This actually controls the substances moving from or being given from the mother to the fetus and the components that come from the fetus to the mother. There are substances that can pass across the placenta, but never the blood of the mother mixes with the blood of the fetus. The blood never mixes because that cannot go across the placenta. But substances, materials can be transported across the placenta. So that is part of the uterine wall. From the placenta, there is a cord-like structure. That is what we call as the umbilical cord. Umbilical cord. So you have the embryonic sac, what we normally call as the water bag, because it is a fluid-filled sac. So it's like water, and the fetus is floating in that fluid. So the fetus gets its nutrition, it does not dry, it has many facilities, it's prevented from getting affected by shocks. So all that is facilitated by the embryonic sac and the embryonic fluid. At the same time, there is the placenta and the umbilical cord through which substances are transported from the mother to the fetus, fetus to the mother. So that is how the development takes place. Now if we look at the development of the fetus, after implantation, fetal development occurs with the division of cells. So in about 6 weeks, that is almost after 1.5 months. Normally 4 weeks is considered as a month. So 6 weeks after 1.5 months, protective membranes called embryonic membranes develop. So I told you the embryonic membranes form the embryonic sac. So embryonic sac is made up of membranes. Embryonic membranes. There is a fluid in them, that is the embryonic fluid. Fetus is sunk in this fluid. So there is a fluid, fetus is sunk in the fluid and it's floating in the fluid. The place that the embryonic membranes connect with the uterine wall is known as the placenta. So this part is what we call as the placenta. So here you can see the embryonic membrane connects to the wall of the uterus. That is the placenta. Is that clear to you? So with that, students, I'll move on to the next slide where we look at the development of the fetus each month. So material exchange from mother to fetus and fetus to mother occurs through umbilical cord. I explain what umbilical cord is. You all know what an umbilical cord is. Where the umbilical cord was attached to each person. After the baby is born, the umbilical cord is cut off. Then after a few days or a week or so, the umbilical cord, the part that is attached to the baby, will dry and fall off. And that is the part that is usually known as the belly button. So that is how the baby during the fetal stage is connected with the mother. So umbilical cord is the tissue in placental mammals. I use this word, placental mammals, through which nutrients and oxygen are exchanged between the mother and the fetus. So from mother to fetus, it is nutrients, then the oxygen and even pathogens. Normally they say when the mother is carrying a baby, an expecting mother. So there the mother has to be careful because if she gets infected, those pathogens can enter through the placenta, that is through the umbilical cord, and it can affect the growing fetus. So even some of the pathogens can go through the placenta and through the umbilical cord. In addition to that, if a pregnant mother drinks alcohol or smokes, even those substances can pass through the placenta and the umbilical cord. So you have to be careful. If a mother is expecting, even if she becomes a passive smoker, you all know what a passive smoker is. A person exposed to, the person does not smoke, but they can be exposed to smoke. So in cigarette smoke, there can be nicotine and other harmful substances. They can be inhaled by the mother, and from the mother that can go into the fetus. So that can harm the fetus. So nutrients and oxygen are important components that need to enter the fetus. In addition to that, pathogens, alcohol, even cigarette smoke, sometimes even medications. Now, if the mother needs to take medications, some of these medications can pass through the umbilical cord and the placenta. So there you have to be careful. Right. So umbilical cord is the tissue in placental mammals through which nutrients and oxygen are exchanged between the mother and fetus. So at the same time, from the fetus to the mother also, substances are exchanged. What are they? Those are the excretory substances or material, excretory material, and also carbon dioxide. This is very important, students. You all have to remember. So, though nutrients, oxygen and agents of diseases, some disease-causing microorganisms like virus. So, not all pathogens, some pathogens, some viruses transfer from mother to fetus. Blood exchange does not occur through umbilical cord. That is very, very important. Blood exchange does not occur through umbilical cord. That's very important, students. The blood of the mother does never mix with the blood of the fetus. So, there is no exchange of blood. Removal of excretory products and carbon dioxide also occur through umbilical cord. So, from the mother to the fetus, nutrients, oxygen, pathogens, even as I told you, some of the medicines, then even alcohol, all those can go to reach the fetus. But these are the two things that are important for the fetus, nutrients and oxygen. Whereas from the fetus, excretory material and carbon dioxide have to be removed back to the mother. So, that is how material exchange takes place through the umbilical cord, and the umbilical cord is attached to the uterine wall via the placenta. That's why we call them as placental mammals. Placental mammals. With that, I will move on to the next slide, students. Principal changes of fetus with time. So, as I told you, normally the fetus takes about 10 months to develop. So, 1 month is 4 weeks, about 40 weeks for the development. Now, you can remember after 7 days, that is 1 week, we call the mass of cells as the blastula. That is what gets implanted. And after 6 weeks, the embryonic membranes form the embryonic sac and there is the embryonic fluid. So, here the changes are after 3 months. From 3 months, the changes that we can observe. So, time period is given in months and the principal changes of fetus with time is given to you. So, initially, it is the change during 3 months or 3rd month. After 3rd month, the fetus takes human form. So, initially, if you look at the fetus, say after 1 or 2 weeks, it's like a mass of cells. Then almost at the end of 1 or 2 months, it's like a rod-shaped structure. But at the end of 3 months, the baby takes the form of a human. So, the fetus takes the form of a human. Head of fetus is large with respect to other parts of the body. So, if you compare normally, when the child is born also, you can see, students, you would have observed that the head is somewhat larger. But inside the mother's womb, that is the uterus, when it is developing, the head of the fetus is large compared to the body parts. Then development of nails start. Nails in the fingers and toes, it starts in 3 months. And male and female sex organs are also developed. So, within the 3 months, the baby or the fetus becomes the male and female and the organs are all developed. Then in 4 months' time, development of skeleton. You know what skeleton is, the bones of our body, the skeletal system that helps in locomotion and all that. So, development of skeleton starts during the 4th month. At the same time, hair begins to grow. So, mammals, they normally have hair on skin. So, that starts to grow during the 4th month. Then we have the 5 months baby, 5 months fetus. 5 months fetus is completely covered with hair. So, you would have seen when the baby is born, sometimes even they have more hair on their face and on the sides of the face and below the mouth and all that, they have more hair. Some babies, not all, some babies. So, that's because the fetus is completely covered with hair. Mother can feel the movements of fetus for the first time. So, after 5 months of the 5th month development, the fetus starts to move. It starts to move its limbs, the legs and the hands. So, the movement can be felt by the mother. Heartbeat of fetus can be observed from outside. So, when you get a scan or when you place a stethoscope on the mother's belly, then you can hear the heartbeat of the child. But here the heartbeat is very, very fast than a normal adult. Average rate of heartbeat is 120 to 140 per minute. Normally, a healthy adult, the heartbeat is maximum about 100. But here you can see the fetus, small children also have a higher heart rate, but the fetus has a heart rate of 120 to 140 per minute. So that is within the first 5 months. So when we say 5 months, each month is 4 weeks. So this is about 20 weeks of development inside the uterus. So I'll move on to the next slide. So after 5 months, it is 6 months. 6 months, it is the eyebrows and eyelashes that have developed. The eye had been already formed, so the eyebrows and eyelashes develop. And after that, during the 7th month, the baby opens the eyes. So 7 months, eyelids open, skin is wrinkled in nature. Why wrinkle? There is fluid around us and also the skin is still developing. So, skin is not polished like our skin or the newborn babies. You would have seen their skin is somewhat wrinkled. So, skin is wrinkled in nature. That is in 7 months. And thereafter, 8 months. Subcutaneous fat begins to deposit. So, 7 months you can see the skin is wrinkled because it's only the soft skin layer. But during the 8th month, subcutaneous fat. What is subcutaneous fat? Normally, a fat layer is present under our skin, below the skin. That's why we call it subcutaneous fat. That starts to deposit. So, then the wrinkleness can decrease to a certain extent. But even then, when the newborn baby, you would have seen the skin is somewhat wrinkled compared to the children or even adults. Weight of fetus is about 2 kilograms. But that is not enough for a healthy baby. When the baby is born, the fetus is born, they should have a minimum weight of 2.5 kilograms if they are very healthy. So, by the end of 8 months, they are about 2 kilograms in weight. And thereafter, 9 months. 9 months, nails of fingers have completely grown. So, earlier the nails started to develop. Now, the nails of fingers are completely grown. Testes are positioned in the scrotum. You all know the reason why testis has to be in the scrotum. The sperms cannot develop and survive in normal human body temperature. So, that is why the testes are present inside the scrotum or the testis sac external to the body. So, testes are positioned in scrotum and body shows a full-grown nature. The body of the fetus is now completely grown. So, the fetus will look exactly like a human baby and it is ready to come out of the mother's womb. So, at this time, weight of fetus is about 2.5 to 3.5 kilograms. Now, you all know these students, you all have that book where your parents would have marked your weight. So, there you enter the birth weight of your. So, birth weight of the child is entered in that book and they monitor the growth. So, there initially if the baby is 2.5 to 3.5 kilograms, they come under the normal weight region. Below that is somewhat underweight and above that it can be overweight for a newborn baby. So, normally the baby has to have a weight of 2.5 to 3.5 kilograms. So, those are the developments taking place inside the uterus. That is the development of fetus inside the uterus. So, now 9 months means 36 weeks. Normally, the development continues to 39 to 40 weeks. So, after that, the child will be born. That is known as parturition or childbirth. We will move on to the next slide. Development of fetus in uterus, it's shown as the diagram. So, here you can see students, this is the embryonic sac I told you. The water bag, embryonic membranes or sac you can see. And there you can see the placenta is marked here. You can see where the embryonic sac is connected to the uterine wall. You can see the placenta. From the placenta, can you all see the umbilical cord that comes from the mother and it connects to the abdomen of the fetus. So there you can see in this diagram, of course you can't see that, but normally you all know it's connected to the abdomen of the fetus. Now this is a fetus that is almost ready to come out of the mother's womb. That is why the fetus is turned upside down towards childbirth. Closer to childbirth, the fetus turns upside down, head comes down so that it can push through easily through the cervix, the vagina and the vulva. That is easier. But you all know normally the child is born with the head coming out first. But there are instances where the child does not turn like this. So the child is born with the legs coming out first. But that is rare. Normally it is the head that comes out first. So the child has, or the fetus has turned upside down. So here you can see fetus looks like a human baby, a completely level up human baby. So this is the uterine wall, embryonic sac and the cervix part here. The bladder is of course pushed to a side, here vagina. So the head has to push through this part and come out, and the anus is here. So that is how the baby or the fetus will be after the development of 9 months. So, a complete human fetus, completely developed. With that, I will move on to the next slide. So, childbirth or parturition. I told you all this. When it is close to childbirth, head of fetus in uterus turn towards vagina. So, that's important. Head of fetus in uterus turn towards vagina. So, although normally we have the skull, that is the bones, but when the child is born, you all know students, the skull is not that rigid. It's somewhat soft, so that it's easy for the baby, the fetus, to push through the vagina and the cervix part of the uterus. So, that is why the fetus turns towards the vagina. The development of fetus completes in about 280 days. So, when we say 280 days, it is about 40 weeks. 7 days a week, so 40 weeks, that's 10 months, 280 days. Then the fetus is pushed outside through vagina by the contraction of muscles of uterus. That is important. Contraction of muscles of uterus. That is when the mother who is expecting the child feels the pain due to the contraction of uterine muscles. Then only the fetus can be pushed out. This process is known as childbirth or parturition. Further contraction of uterine wall disconnects the placenta and the associated tissues. Initially, the fetus comes out, that is, the child is born. After that, the placenta also is expelled out from the uterus along with some of the tissues, because that cannot remain inside the mother's uterus. It has to come out. But at the same time, the umbilical cord will be attached to the newborn baby. The doctors normally cut the umbilical cord and they clip it. After parturition, the umbilical cord that connected placenta and fetus is cut and tied or clipped. So, that is after parturition. Is that clear, students? So, after fertilization, the blastula gets implanted in the uterus wall. We saw how the fetus develops inside the embryonic membranes or the embryonic sac for 9 months. And after the 9 months development, the fetus is completely developed and looks like the normal human child. And thereafter, almost after 280 days, that is 10 months, but even after 9 months, 36 weeks, the baby is completely developed. The baby will come out, the fetus will come out of the uterus. So, the head comes out first. That is why the child has to turn towards the vagina. The head will be towards the vagina. And that process where the fetus comes out of the uterus due to contraction of uterine muscles is what we call as childbirth or parturition. So after that, the umbilical cord has to be cut off from the child and it has to be tied or clipped. But the placenta will automatically come out due to the contraction of the vagina. So that is childbirth. Is that clear to you all, students? So with that, of course, we have come to the almost the end of the lesson. That is reproduction of men. So I will move on to the next slide. There is an assignment. List out the materials that pass from mother to fetus through umbilical cord. List out the materials that pass from fetus to mother through placenta. So I told you all, students, never the blood of the mother mixes with the blood of the fetus because placenta prevents that. But through the umbilical cord, materials are transported. So they are from mother to fetus, from mother to fetus. So from mother to fetus, what are the materials that are given? Nutrients are given, oxygen is given, and also the pathogens. In addition to that, I mentioned to you all, students, even the alcohol and even other substances, some medications, medicines, and also even the smoke. Some of the components in cigarette smoke also can pass through the umbilical cord to the fetus. But for us, we will consider only the three main substances. The nutrients have to be given. That is for the development of the fetus. Then oxygen, that is for the fetus to breathe, and also some pathogens. Or you can say disease causing agents. Disease causing agents. They all can go from the mother to the fetus. At the same time, what are the substances coming from the fetus to the mother? Fetus to the mother. So the substances coming from fetus to mother through the placenta. What are they? The excretory materials. Because the baby is breathing and also there are metabolic processes taking place. So excretory materials are produced. So they will come from the fetus to the mother through the umbilical cord and pass through the placenta. So excretory materials. Excretory materials. And also because the baby breathes from the mother, oxygen goes to the baby through the umbilical cord. Then the carbon dioxide that is exhaled by the baby will come back to the mother through the umbilical cord. So carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. So those are the substances. So the activity was to list out the materials that pass from mother to fetus through umbilical cord and to list out the materials that pass from fetus to mother through placenta. So mother to fetus, nutrients, oxygen, some pathogens or what we can say as disease causing agents like virus. Then fetus to mother, it is the excretory materials and carbon dioxide. So that is what passes through the placenta as well as the umbilical cord. So then I will move on to the next slide where we will discuss the hormonal coordination related to this reproductive systems. Hormonal coordination. Human reproduction process is completely regulated by hormones in both males and females. You all can remember, students, when we discussed the male reproductive system, there was only one hormone. What was that? The testosterone. Testosterone is a lipid hormone that is produced by the male reproductive system, the testes. But in the female reproductive system, when we discuss the menstrual cycle, we came across 4 different hormones. Out of that, the luteinizing hormone LH, follicle stimulating hormone FSH, both those are produced or secreted by the pituitary gland in your brain. Whereas estrogen and progesterone, again those are lipid hormones, they are secreted by the ovaries. So you can remember that. Now we will look at the functions. I have tabulated the hormones: FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, LH, luteinizing hormone, testosterone, estrogen and progesterone. And we need to write the endocrine gland. Endocrine gland is the organ that secretes this particular hormone and also their function. We will be discussing the endocrine system, the hormonal coordination in grade 11 as well. So for now, what we have already discussed is what you need to remember. So FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. What is the gland? That is pituitary gland. What is the function? You all can remember during the menstrual cycle, the first 14 days is the follicular phase. During that phase only, the primary follicle develops into the Graafian follicle. That is stimulated by the FSH. So, FSH stimulates the development of primary follicle to Graafian follicle. That is the function of FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Then we have LH. What is that? Luteinizing hormone. LH is luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone. So I told you all students, luteinizing, L-U-T-E-I-N-I, you can use Z-I-N-G or S-I-N-G, luteinizing hormone, that is LH. Again, what is the structure, that organ that secretes luteinizing hormone? That is also pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. And what is the function? Stimulation of release of ovum or ovulation process and the processes occurring thereafter. That is the luteinizing phase. So, here it stimulates ovulation. That is the function of the luteinizing hormone. Then we have the next one, that is testosterone, related to the male reproductive system, and that is produced or secreted by the testes. So, testosterone is secreted by testes. And what is the function? It is the hormone that actually controls the development of secondary sexual characteristics in males as well as the spermatogenesis. What is spermatogenesis? The production of the sperms inside the testes. So, both are controlled by testosterone. So, here you can say development of secondary sexual characteristics characteristics and spermatogenesis. So this is the only hormone related to the male reproductive system. Then we have the other two hormones related to female reproductive system, and they are produced by the female reproductive system. That also the ovaries. Estrogen and progesterone both are secreted by the ovary. So you can remember, students, so the estrogen actually controls the development of secondary sexual characteristics in females. So estrogen, it's secreted by the ovary. Development of secondary sexual characteristics. Then we have the last hormone, that is progesterone. Progesterone is also secreted by the ovary. You can remember that is secreted during the luteal phase of the ovary. That is after ovulation, the change of the burst Graafian follicle to corpus luteum and then to corpus albicans, that is the luteal phase. During that phase only, ovary secretes progesterone. And what does this do? This actually controls or it is involved with the development of fetus inside the uterus. That is after fertilization and implantation, the development of fetus is actually controlled by progesterone. So you all can remember, if fertilization doesn't take place, the progesterone level decreases and the estrogen level increases, and during that time only the menstrual flow occurs. The first 4 days of the changes taking place in the uterus, what we call as the menstrual phase. So you can remember that. So progesterone is involved with the development of the fetus in the uterus. So this is development of fetus in the uterus. So development of fetus in the uterus, we call it pregnancy. And also progesterone actually controls the menstrual cycle. Menstrual, or we can say regulates the menstrual cycle. Regulates the menstrual cycle. So those are the functions of different hormones. So there are 5 hormones involved with the reproductive system of man. In that, FSH and LH, they are produced by the pituitary gland and they have their functions. FSH stimulates the development of primary follicle to Graafian follicle, whereas LH, that is luteinizing hormone, stimulates ovulation. And in man, testosterone, that is secreted by testis, that is involved with the development of secondary sexual characteristics and also spermatogenesis. Then if you take estrogen and progesterone, both are involved with the female reproductive system. They are produced by the ovary, and estrogen is involved with the development of secondary sexual characteristics of females, and also the progesterone is involved with the development of fetus. So it actually regulates pregnancy as well as it regulates the menstrual cycle. So these are the hormones that you need to remember, students. When you remember the hormones, you need to know the organ that secretes the hormone and their function. So as I told you, we will be discussing this again in grade 11 when we discuss the hormonal coordination. So with that, students, I have come to the end of this section where we discuss the reproduction in man. In the next slide, I will discuss some diseases related to the reproductive system. Sexually transmitted diseases. So there are diseases related to all different systems of our body. Since we discuss reproduction, so that is the diseases are related to the reproductive organs and normally they are transmitted sexually. You all know, students, there are diseases that are caused by pathogens. And these pathogens enter the host body via different methods. There can be vectors like mosquitoes, insects. It can be borne by air. It can become contagious through water or food, sometimes through excretory materials. So like that, there are different ways in which the pathogens that cause diseases enter into the body. But these diseases are caused again by pathogens, but they enter the host body by sexual intercourse. That is why we call it as sexually transmitted diseases. Diseases transmit from one person to another mainly because of a sexual contact, and sexual secretions are known as sexually transmitted diseases. That is important. So only when there is a sexual contact or sexual secretions are in contact with another person, these diseases will be transmitted. So why do you all need to know that? You all are in your adolescent stage, so you all know the changes taking place in your body. You all are undergoing these changes and also you all have to be careful. So there it is not only by willingness, by forced acts also these diseases can be transmitted. So therefore you have to be very thoughtful and also you should have an idea about the diseases so that you can prevent them. Prevent them occurring to yourself as well as prevent the occurrence to your friends or family members. That is why you need to know these diseases. These are transmitted due to blood transmission too. That is also possible. In those days, they used to sterilize the syringe, the needle of injection syringes. You all know the needles are sterilized and reused. That was very long time ago. But now you all know they use disposable syringes and needles. So for each person, it is a new syringe and a needle. That is to avoid the transmission of sexually transmitted diseases because they can transmit through blood as well. So the same way they can go from the mother's blood to the fetus. We discussed that. Through the placenta, through the umbilical cord, pathogens or disease-causing agents can go from the mother to the fetus. So these diseases, sometimes the microorganisms can go from the mother to the fetus. Symptoms of such diseases can usually be found on sex organs. So these are sexually transmitted diseases, more chances that they get contact through sexual contact or sexual secretions. So therefore, these disease-causing agents cause the symptoms on sex organs. And there are about 20 such diseases that have been identified so far. But out of that, we will be discussing 4 different diseases. One is syphilis. Then there is herpes. Then AIDS. And also gonorrhea. So there is syphilis, herpes, AIDS and gonorrhea. 4 diseases that are more common. So we will be discussing those 4 common diseases. But there are about 20 diseases that are sexually transmitted diseases. So with that, I will move on to the next slide, students. So the first disease is gonorrhea. You can look at the spelling, students, Gonorrhea, or it can be spelled as Gonorrhea, gonorrhea. This is transmitted by a bacterium called Neisseria gonorrhea. So that is very important. This is transmitted by a bacterium called Neisseria gonorrhea. So a bacteria is the causative agent. Secretions from sex organs, pain, blockage of fallopian tube are some of its symptoms. So from the sex organs, say the mammary gland or the genital parts of the body of the female body or the male body, there can be secretions. White color secretions or blood-like secretions can come out from the sex organs. There will be pain in the body as well as there will be blockage of fallopian tube. So you all know the sperm and the ovum have to travel through the fallopian tube. So if there is a blockage in the fallopian tube, that can prevent fertilization. So not only it causes the different symptoms, but it can also prevent fertilization. So that is gonorrhea caused by a bacterium. That is important. It is caused by a bacterium. And this disease can be cured, and if not treated, it will result in blindness and lameness. You all know what blindness and lameness. Blindness, the function of the eye can be lost, and also lameness, the function of your limbs can be lost. So that can be caused if not treated. But if you identify the disease, if you don't ignore the symptoms, you consult a doctor, then of course it can be cured. This is the problem, students. Sometimes when we think that it is a sexually transmitted diseases, normally people are reluctant to consult a doctor. That is where it can become very harmful. So if someone identifies the symptoms, if they have the symptoms, it is very, very advisable to consult a doctor. So that is the first disease, gonorrhea, caused by a bacterium called Neisseria gonorrhea. So all these diseases, students, you all should know the causative agent and the symptoms. With that, I will move on to the next disease, that is syphilis. So when we say syphilis, this is transmitted again by a bacterium called Treponema pallidum. Treponema pallidum. So you all can see, students, those are the scientific names. That is why they are all printed in italics, and you all know the epithets. You are familiar with the binomial nomenclature, Treponema pallidum. And after about 3 months of infection, painless blisters appear on sex organs. So here again you can see the sex organs, genital parts, the mammary glands. So they are painless blisters. There are small tiny blisters. You know what the blisters are, like pimples. You all know the difference between pimples and blisters. So you get blisters near the sex organs, but they are not painful. They are automatically cured. So this is after 3 months of infection, you get the painless blisters. They get cured automatically. So again, we tend to ignore the symptom. But thereafter, after about 6 months, fever and pain in throat appears. So initially 3 months, there are painless blisters. And after that, after about 6 months, you will get fever and pain in throat. If treated in early stages, again this disease can be cured. So as I told you before also, when you see the symptoms, it's better not to ignore them. You have to treat the disease. Pathogens can exist in blood for a long time and can spread to other organs also. So in this disease also, the pathogen can spread to other organs. So you have to be careful. That is syphilis. With that, I will move on to the next disease, herpes. This is transmitted by a virus called herpes simplex. So here it is a viral disease transmitted by a virus called herpes simplex. So herpes is the disease, the virus is herpes simplex. Highly painful blisters. Here of course, highly painful blisters on sex organs are the symptoms. So again, the genital areas, the mammary glands, those are the sex organs. So there you get highly painful blisters. Whereas for syphilis, you get blisters that are not painful. So you have to remember that. This inactivates the nervous systems and is deep-rooted. So this particular virus, herpes simplex, can affect your nervous system if a person is infected by the virus. And it is deep-rooted. It enters into your body in a deep manner and it retains inside the body. So, though it is not fatal, it has no permanent treatment. That is the problem. It's not fatal, but it has no permanent treatment. It will remain in the system of the person for a very, very long time. So, on and off, you can get the symptoms. So, highly painful blisters on sex organs are the symptoms. And also, the nervous system will be affected. That is why you have to be careful. So, we will move on to the next disease, AIDS. This is something familiar to you students, something always talked about in a common manner compared to all the other diseases. Gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes, we do discuss about AIDS in a more common manner. So, you are familiar with that. It is caused by a virus. It affects the immune system. That is why the virus is known as the human immunodeficiency virus. So, here human immunodeficiency virus, that is HIV, is the virus that causes AIDS. AIDS is acquired immunodeficiency symptom. That is the abbreviation is AIDS. This is transmitted by human immunodeficiency virus, that is HIV, and symptoms may appear in about 2 to 15 years after infection. So, sometimes this particular virus, HIV virus, can go from the mother to the fetus. But when the baby is born, you would not know that the baby has HIV. But even after 15 years, the child can get the disease. So, even another adult who gets infected by HIV can get the symptoms after 2 to 15 years. This may be fatal and cannot be cured. Now, AIDS can be fatal and it cannot be cured. And because it affects your immune system, the person affected by AIDS has a very weak immune system. So, they can also be affected by other diseases very quickly because the immune system is weak. AIDS is transmitted by sexual secretions and blood. This is very important, sexual secretions and blood. So, that is why when you are given blood transfusion, normally they use very sterile instruments. Normally, all are disposable. I told you all about the syringes, even the needles, all those are disposable. So, during blood transfusion, if the blood of a person positive with HIV, even though they don't have the disease, now it takes 2 to 15 years, but the pathogens can remain in the blood. So, if another person is transfused with blood that has HIV virus, then the receiver, that is the donor, has the pathogens, so the receiver will get the disease. That is also a possibility. So, AIDS is transmitted by sexual secretions and blood transfusion. To keep off from this disease, risk activities and vectors should be avoided. So, risk activities, unprotected sex or not improper sexual activities have to be avoided. And also here, when they mean vectors, normally we say vectors. Vectors are the organisms that carry pathogens. Vectors like mosquito or flies. But for AIDS, there are no vectors actually. It is only through sexual secretions and blood. So, there are no vectors, but what they mean is the sexual secretions and blood and even the mother's milk. So, those can carry the pathogen. So, that is why you have to be careful. Is that okay, students? So, AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So, up to that, we have discussed 4 diseases that are sexually transmitted diseases. Gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes and AIDS. So, all these can be prevented. it is possible to avoid sexually transmitted diseases by being responsible during sexual activities. So that is why y'all have to consider this very seriously. You have to take it into your mind, not only for your protection of the others around you as well. So if you have that concept, if you have that thought, then we can prevent these particular diseases. Because here they are not airborne, they are not vector carried. So this is by sexual activities. So that is why we have to be mindful. Each and every individual has to be mindful so that we can avoid these diseases. I am sure you all can understand that, students. So with that, I have come to the end of this lesson. In the next slide, I will discuss the summary with you. So summary, in this lesson, students, we discuss different types of reproduction. The asexual reproduction or the vegetative reproduction seen in plants, then the sexual reproduction of plants and the sexual reproduction of men. So before that, we compared the two types of reproduction, asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So this is the summary of the lesson. Reproduction of organism is of two types. There are sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. So when we say sexual reproduction, you all know it is seen in evolutionary advanced animals as well as plants. Whereas asexual is seen in less developed or evolutionarily not advanced, the primitive plants and animals. And also the other plants, even the evolutionary advanced plants like the angiosperms, they show vegetative reproduction. Sexual reproduction is the reproduction associated with sexual structures and sexual processes. So under that, you can remember the sexual reproduction of plants. There, the flower is the sexual reproductive structure. Whereas in man, we discuss the male and female reproductive systems. The principal method of asexual reproduction in plants is the vegetative propagation by aerial or underground parts. So, what are vegetative parts? Parts other than the flower, because flower is the sexual reproductive structure of plants. So, there again, there can be aerial parts, the parts above the ground and underground parts. You can remember the underground stems, the different types like rhizome, comb, bulbs as well as stem tubers. Then if we look at natural vegetative propagation of plants occur by roots, leaves, suckers, runners, bulbils and underground stems. So those are the different natural vegetative propagative parts of plants. Roots, leaves, suckers, runners, bulbils and underground stems. Then we have the artificial vegetative propagation of plants is carried out by methods like stem cuttings, rooting of stem cuttings, you can remember, layering, ground layering, aerial layering, then grafting, there was bud grafting and twig grafting and also tissue culture. We have discussed all these processes in detail. Then flower, which is the sexual structure of plants, consists of calyx, corolla, androsium and gynosium. You know the functions. Calyx protects the flower in the bud stage. Corolla also protects the inner part of the flower in the bud stage and also it attracts insects for pollination. Then androsium is the male reproductive structure of flowers and gynosium is the female reproductive parts of the flower. And androsium is also known as the stamen and the gynosium is known as the pistil. Then animals, wind and water contribute for pollination. We discuss them as the agents of pollination of flowers. So animals, wind and water contribute for pollination of flowers. Flowers have special adaptations for pollination by each agent. So you all know there are two methods of pollination possible, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is more preferred because there will be mixing of characters. That is why there are agents of pollination as well as flowers have adaptations to prevent self-pollination and to promote cross-pollination, as well as they are adapted to attract animals and also to get pollinated by wind and water. You all can remember all those adaptations. Now, I will move on to the next slide. After pollination, flowers produce fruits and seeds. So, after pollination, you all can remember the pollen tube grows, the male gamete cell enters the ovary and fuses with the ovules. So, thereafter, the ovary become the fruits and the fertilized ovules become the seeds. Animals, wind, water and explosive mechanism contribute for dispersal of fruits and seeds. So, you all know the disadvantages if the fruits and seeds fall under the mother plant and start growing. So, because of that, they need to be dispersed. Then, sexual maturity of man is referred to as puberty. Puberty, adolescence, all those are the sexual maturity of man. Secondary sexual characteristics appear at this stage. So, you know, in males, there are different sexual characteristics developed, and in females, there is a set of sexual characteristics that are developed during puberty or adolescence. Male reproductive system produces sperms and female reproductive system produces ova for sexual reproduction. So, the male gamete cell is the sperm. Female gamete cell is the ova. They are produced by the respective reproductive systems for reproduction. Embryo is developed by the zygote, which results in the process of fertilization of a sperm and an ovum. So, the sperm enters the vagina, travels through the uterus, enters the fallopian tube. At the same time, from the ovary, ovum comes into the fallopian tube and fertilization takes place inside the fallopian tube. Then we call it the zygote. Zygote undergoes cell division, becomes the morula, and then it becomes the blastula. The blastula gets implanted where the embryo develops inside the uterus. So, there we call it the fetus, and you all can remember the different stages of fetal development inside the uterus. The cyclic process that is associated with the reproductive system of sexually matured female is menstrual cycle. So, you all know there is a 28-day cycle taking place inside the body of a sexually matured female, and that leads to changes taking place in the ovary as well as the uterus. And in the ovary, there are two phases. You all can remember the follicular phase and the luteal phase. Whereas in the uterus, there are three phases: the menstrual phase, the proliferation phase, and the secretory phase. So, those are the changes taking place during the menstrual cycle. Gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes, and AIDS are some of the diseases that are sexually transmitted. So, we have discussed those diseases as well. So, with that, students, I have come to the end of this lesson. That is reproduction, continuity of life. Only when organisms reproduce, the life can continue. They produce new offspring. New generation is produced from the existing generation so that their species continues. That is what we call as continuity of life. Under that, we have discussed the asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction, and also vegetative reproduction of plants as well as sexual reproduction of plants and the reproduction of man. So, I am sure you all have a very good understanding of the lesson. So, in the next chapter, I will discuss the questions given in your textbook. So, before that, I am sure you all will answer the questions first, and then you can listen to my discussion in the next chapter.